Right now, all over Ottawa, there are boomers sitting in homes that they believe are worth a small fortune. And a lot of them are worth quite a bit, but many are about to realize that that number they have in their head is not real. It's not because the market crashed, it definitely hasn't, but because the price in their head, the one that they got from what their neighbors sold for back in the peak in 2021, 2022, was never a number that a buyer today was ever going to be willing to pay, especially for a dated house that needs some work. And for a lot of you watching, that's probably not the worst news. If you've been priced out of the detached market in Ottawa for the last 5 or 10 years, a seller being anchored to a fantasy number isn't a tragedy for you. It actually could be the leverage that you need in order to get into this section of the market. But that leverage can cut both ways. A house like the one I'm describing is either the opening that you've been waiting for or one of the most costly mistakes that you're ever going to make. Now, I'm very fortunate in that I have had the privilege of sitting on both sides of this conversation. I have worked with the seller, sitting at their kitchen table, discussing what they should price their property for and comparing it to what their neighbors got a few years ago. And I've also had the conversation with the buyer after touring a property like this, where the buyer's kind of shaking their head and being like, how could they be asking this price? It doesn't make any sense. And I want to walk you through what both sides of this conversation look and feel like, so you as a buyer trying to break into this more expensive, detached part of the market can make the most of the opportunity that I think is legitimately there today, while avoiding some of the common pitfalls that could cost you big money down the road. The first thing you need to realize before you make an offer is that the number that the seller is putting on paper was never real. It's coming from a peak price that they saw their neighbor get in 2021 or 2022. And that number was so shocking and positive to them that it's stuck in their head and it never really left, even though the buyer who would have paid that price and the mortgage that would have allowed them to do so is long gone. Here's what the data actually shows. Detached prices in Ottawa peaked just under 800K in March of 2022. This is the benchmark price we're talking about. Today, the benchmark price sits around $720,000. So even for a normal, updated home, the market is sitting around 10% below the number a lot of these owners locked into their heads back at the peak. Now add to that calculation the fact that a lot of these homes are fairly dated. The seller sitting across the table from you looks at this place and sees the family rate they raised, the basement they finished themselves, and again, that number from 2021 that's sticking in their mind. When you as the buyer go in, you're looking at a roof that's due, a furnace that is on its last legs, and a kitchen from 1994. It's the same house, you just might be the first person in the room pricing it honestly. So make your offer from those numbers and not from what their expectations are. The list price is really more about either the marketing strategy or what the seller feels the property is worth. And you're also a very different buyer than that neighbor sold to. You're carrying higher payments. Costs for things like insurance, utilities, groceries, childcare, all of those costs have gone up over that same time period. So instead of walking in like a 2021 buyer and asking, okay, what do I have to do to get this place ahead of the 5 or 10 other offers that it's going to get? You're asking, how do I avoid making a mistake? That's a completely different negotiating dynamic, and it's exactly why that fantasy number just sits there untouched for 60, 90, or 120 days. And even if you can negotiate them off of their crazy asking price, a seller losing money or losing money they think they're entitled to doesn't automatically mean that you're getting a great deal. For example, picture a 4-bedroom detached in somewhere like Barrhaven, built in the late 80s. On paper, it looks like a steal next to the new builds that are being built down the street. But you walk in, the roof is original, the furnace is pushing 20 years, so is the AC. The windows are fogged up because they've lost their seals, and the kitchen hasn't been touched since the owners moved in 25 years ago or something like that. All of a sudden, you're looking at paying somewhere in the high 5 to low 6 figures before you even unpack a single box to update all of this stuff. That's not necessarily a discount. That's a renovation project with a mortgage attached. And you're going to have to carry those costs while you're fixing it because the cost of owning hits you every single month. Heating and cooling that much space runs a lot more than heating or cooling an apartment or an entry-level home. And the property taxes on an older detached property are probably going to be a lot higher than whatever you're paying now. The discount that you negotiated when you purchased is a one-time number, but those monthly costs continue to hit every single month. With that said, it's important to remember that this section of the market is not a part of the market that's falling apart right now. The overall Ottawa detached market is actually doing just fine. The average benchmark price is around 720,000 as I mentioned earlier, which is basically flat year over year. And the average home is selling in around 27 days, which is not a crazy long time. This is not a market crash, and anyone that's trying to tell you that it is trying to sell you a fear narrative. What's actually happening is a little more subtle and a little more narrow, and it's actually the part that helps you negotiate a good deal. Inventory is climbing. Even though the prices aren't going down too much, the number of properties sitting on the market at the end of the month is significantly higher year over year and month over month. We're sitting at roughly 1,850 detached homes on the market right now, which is up from about 1,750 last year, and it's been building all spring in 2026 so far. So what you're looking at is a market with more homes and the same set of careful buyers that were there last year. And the ones sitting longest are exactly the homes that we're talking about, the big dated houses where sellers are still holding on to those peak price numbers. So here's how you can turn one of these sellers into somebody that you can work with without inheriting all of the problems of the house. Walk into that showing already thinking like an inspector before you fall in love with the property, not after. Take a look at the big items like the roof, the windows, the doors, the furnace, and price those items in before you put an offer on paper. And don't just submit a low offer without any context. Have your agent tell the story, make the case, show the numbers to the seller, and let them know that you're not trying to lowball them, but that you're trying to offer a fair price anchored in current market data. The biggest piece of leverage you can use in this conversation is a home that's been sitting for a longer period of time. If a home's been sitting for 60 or 90 days, that seller is already negotiable, whether or not they've admitted it to themselves. I had a young couple looking at older detached homes in the West End this year, and they found a place on a great street with terrible carpet and a furnace that was on its last legs. It had been listed pretty high, but they were able to take that all into consideration, tell the story, and negotiate a price that made sense for them in the current market. When we first started talking to the seller, it sounded like there was going to be no room to budge. But once we showed them the data and let them sit with the offer for a little while, they came around because they understood that the market has changed. So if you're the young couple who has been looking to break into the detached market, this is the message that I want to leave you with. The market is not crashing. There's a chance you might have clicked on this video because you wanted to hear that the people who were pricing you out of the market with their super high home prices are finally stuck, and some of them are, but that's not the win here. The win here is that in a market that's stable but building up in inventory, you have a lot more leverage than you have in the past, even though prices aren't collapsing. And this can especially be the case if you're dealing with someone who's chasing one of those 2021 or 2022 numbers, because there's a decent chance that property has sat on the market for longer than it should. If you can find one of these people who's quietly waiting for an offer and can walk in and show them why the price they're asking doesn't make sense, and can walk them through what the actual price is when you take into consideration what the market has done and the work that needs to be done on the property, you can walk away with an incredible deal. I have seen it happen. Educate yourself, pay attention to what the market is doing, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.